Flying over the rugged terrain, it's easy to see why some people think you don't need a big wall here. Is that actually the case?
Overrun by illegal immigrant drug runners and criminals, one Arizona county is taking the law into their own hands and finding a surprising solution.
The simplest terms is we're trying to see who's crossing the border.
This week, an amazing high-tech, low-cost way to shut down the danger.
In the scenic hills of rural Richmond, Kentucky, sits one of humanity's worst inventions.
And a droplet, if that was to get on my skin, I would have about 3 minutes to live.
But the U.S. is getting rid of chemical weapons in part thanks to one dedicated veteran.
In '84, when they came here and said, "You got chemical weapons, we're going to burn them. You got any questions?"
We suit up to witness the mission to destroy a dangerous stockpile.
This video right here appearing to show
another major media mistake. It turns out this video supposedly showing Mideast war was actually file tape from Kentucky.
That really is fake news.
In your view, did Donald Trump cause the media to descend into madness or just expose media madness that was already in existence?
When it comes to the president and the media, we examine the real casualty.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Today we head to the southwest border for an incredible story about an Arizona county that felt overrun by Mexican drug cartels for years. Now they claim they've been able to slow that to a trickle without a lot of money, high tech, federal help, or even a wall. How are they doing it? Today's cover story is Desert Eyes.
John Ladd is a fourth-generation rancher.
Come on.
His great-grandparents settled this land in Arizona along Mexico's border in 1896.
Originally, the ranch was about twice as big.
By Ladd's count, the Border Patrol has caught hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants on his 16,000 acres over the past 30 years.
It's an everyday deal.
What do you do?
Well, we used to help them, but when you get 200 a day, it gets overwhelming. They've stole about every car or truck we own, and saddles and horses. And
the march of illegal immigrants into Arizona from Mexico is virtually nonstop. Here, a large group crosses over a so-called Normandy fence like it's not even there. And with the traffic comes a steady stream of crime. This man crossed from Mexico and fired off a few shots. These 5 drug smugglers brought 7 backpacks of meth and marijuana. In a matter of days, 380 pounds of pot, heroin, and meth, 1,600 pounds of pot, fentanyl opioids hidden in shoes, smuggled in bras, meth disguised as ice pops in vehicles, 50 pounds, 227 pounds. But in Cochise County, where John Ladd lives, we found there's been an incredible turnaround you may not have heard about.
What I'm talking about is a virtual system of cameras, up to over 500 cameras now that we've implemented.
One camera covers about 200 square feet. The success has been so dramatic, it surprised even those responsible, including Cochise County Sheriff Mark Daniels.
We're doing something right, and it's fair to our citizens. It's what they expect. I'm pretty proud of what we've done here.
And to point out, you've done this improved enforcement and you've gotten this result without a wall.
Without a wall. Without a wall.
To see firsthand, we took to the air with Sheriff Daniels over the 6,200 rural square miles of Cochise County. Flying over the rugged terrain, it's easy to see why some people think you don't need a big wall here. It's too tough to cross. But is that actually the case?
No, the cartel likes this area out here. Though it's rugged, it provides great concealment from the smuggle both human and drugs into this country.
That led to the simple but ingenious concept to deploy a carefully placed network of motion-activated cameras in areas where there are gaps in federal surveillance.
Remember that into that fence is where the federal government stops their protective plan. We pick that up here, and that's where our virtual system has become effective. We have cameras inserted throughout this region, this grid.
We landed to see the type of area where the hidden cameras have been put to good use.
The wall's not going to stop them down here.
Their precise locations a tightly held secret.
You know, this is where our virtual system was implemented, in places like this.
There are cameras out here, we just don't know where.
Yeah, this is part of our virtual system.
Daniels explained that cartels learned to evade Border Patrol cameras by traveling in gullies and ditches. The new system plugs some critical holes.
You know, the surface systems that the federal government has in place are up on top surface areas. They don't go down to the washes like this. So the cartels have exploited these areas. So we came into our areas with our virtual system. This is the areas we watch because we know they're coming through here just like we're standing. And that's one of the reasons we've been successful is we went to areas that the federal government didn't go.
So Mexico's right there.
Yes, and we're probably being watched right now. Here's a big hole in the fence that was cut.
Sergeant Timothy Williams leads the Sheriff's Department effort called SABRE, which stands for Southeastern Arizona Border Regional Enforcement.
We have some of the best fencing that turns into a vehicle barrier that we're looking at now that turns into nothing but a 6-strand barbed wire fence. And here you can physically see a trail that goes, that's not a legitimate trail like we say, that starts in Mexico and comes over the pretty much no fence into the United States. And it's a well-trafficked trail.
Used by?
Illegal alien smuggling, either human smuggling or narcotic smuggling or any of the above. So,
is this part of the surveillance?
Yes, everywhere. Yeah. So, yep.
But the most surprising part of the whole SABRE program is how little it costs.
So these are some of the equipment that we use.
Just a few agents monitor the motion-activated cameras by mobile phone. When an alert comes in, they coordinate a response to catch the interlopers. We traveled by car deep into the Cochise County, Arizona desert with what amounts to about half of the SABRE team, Deputies Mike McGoffin and Jake Karchner.
Can you sort of describe what this program is about, to use the cameras on surveillance in simple terms?
The simplest terms is we're trying to see who's crossing the border, who's sneaking across the border illegally, and then responding to catch those guys or coordinating a response to catch them.
With thousands of miles to cover, the deputies say the key is careful placement.
There's a lot that goes into choosing where we're going to put a camera. So we have to find routes that are being used, whether that's our own intel, whether that's Border Patrol's intel, whether that's ranchers' intel, and we put the cameras on those trails.
These are the kind of images the cameras capture, alerting sheriff's deputies to human smugglers and drug traffickers in real time, in places where Border Patrol technology might have missed them altogether. Internal statistics from the Sheriff's Department show a dramatic uptick in the number of illegal crossers detected, with more than 1,700 arrested over the past 2 years after being caught on camera.
And the ranchers say it best. This is the best it's been in 3 decades. Because we took the weakness of the federal government, made a strength.
We've had the steel fencing since '06.
Ladd says he's seen the federal government spend enormous funds and try countless tactics. He never would have believed something so simple would work so well when Sheriff Daniels first suggested it about 2 years ago.
What did he say it was going to entail?
Well, he said, we're going to put surveillance out. So they put those out and look at your cell phone. Oh, there's a load of dope coming.
How many cameras are on your property?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say over 20.
And because of those cameras and they can see drugs coming across, they can make the arrests and prosecute them.
Yep.
And you so compare it to before this surveillance system, what you might have seen in terms of drugs versus an average day now.
Oh, we had 3 or 4 loads a week of marijuana coming through. Truckfuls, backpackers, you name it. So We haven't had drugs on the ranch for 18 months.
So that's amazing.
What's so remarkable, he says, is that a handful of officers and strategically placed cameras managed to tame prime drug trafficking territory that went largely unprotected for decades.
They shut down a 15-mile corridor of drugs in about 6 months.
Sheriff Daniels has been spreading the word about his strategies and success with other departments and federal law enforcement. Ahead on Full Measure.
The U.S. getting rid of its last remaining supplies of chemical weapons. I'm Scott Thuman in Kentucky to show you how, coming up.
The U.S. was among the nations that used chemical weapons in World War I. Most of the world agreed to ban their use in 1993. Today, we are on the short list of countries that still have stockpiles, but not for long. The military is finally destroying the last of these deadly chemical agents. Scott Thuman takes us on a fascinating inside look at the risky process.
In the scenic hills of rural Richmond, Kentucky, not far from the corner of 1st and Main, sits one of humanity's worst inventions. So dangerous, it's kept behind barbed wire and armed checkpoints in these temperature-controlled igloos. Just getting onto base requires a blood test, and I'm issued a protective hood and 3 needles to inject myself if all goes wrong. That's because this is America's chemical weapons stockpile: sarin, VX, and mustard agent.
You can think of it in terms of a pesticide for humans, because that's basically what it is. It attacks the central nervous system, and a droplet that would fit on the head of a ballpoint pen, if that was to get on my skin, I would have about 3 minutes to live.
That's local veteran Craig Williams. He's one of the reasons you now see this. After years of test runs, weapons of mass destruction are slowly and very carefully being opened on a highly automated production line designed and built for the job. For those who have to sometimes go inside, the danger is unparalleled, and an emergency team is always suited up. Anytime someone's in there working, yes, there are 2 people who are on standby, ready to jump in.
And they just crash in there with a stretcher, throw them in it, drag them back to the airlock, and
Chemical weapons got their first wide-scale use in World War I, and efforts to ban them began soon after that conflict. But it wasn't until the 1990s that a worldwide treaty banning their production was signed. For years, the U.S. has been slowly eliminating its stockpiles. These rockets and artillery shells in Kentucky are the most dangerous of what's left. The mustard agent is destroyed in this custom-built facility, the more lethal VX and sarin in another. We were allowed in during a practice run. The real star of the show here is behind me. It's this robot, which essentially is doing a job that you just don't want people to have to do, or they may not be able to do. It's removing the sarin or VX agent from these munitions and moving on to the next stage. It's all done through a combination of more than 1,000 degrees of heat, water, pressure, and a complex filtration system for the exhaust. Ron Hink runs the show here and has the resume to back it up, having helped clean up the reactor leak in Chernobyl and destroy chemical weapons seized in Syria. How much practice has gone into this?
To exhaustion, I would say, but yeah, we will run drills. We've been, if you're out at the site, it's very common to have a site agent release alarm go off and mask everybody. We train on that. We hope that never happens in real life.
Because these are some of the most dangerous chemicals and chemical agents out there?
Yeah, they were invented to harm, right? So they're very good at what they do. But we like to think we're very good at what we do, and we train to make sure that we are.
But how that should be done is where Craig Williams became a real thorn in the government's side.
In '84, when they came here and said, "You got chemical weapons, we're going to burn them. You got any questions?" That's how this whole thing started.
You were shocked?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we didn't know. And so, I raised my hand. In 35 years, I still got my hand up.
Williams spearheaded efforts to make sure the weapons couldn't simply be incinerated and then exit smokestacks right next to a school.
We will stop this incinerator.
For decades, he galvanized the public and created enough controversy that the military changed procedures, devising a new, safer method of neutralizing the chemicals with more thorough testing. Safer, but never 100% safe for the workers in their $1,000 one-time use suits.
You can hear me just fine at the moment, but you can't talk to me. How you feeling in there? How you doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Doing good.
You're going to be eradicating the last bit of chemical weapons in the U.S. You're on this kind of mission that's really significant.
It is. You know, you think back in history where this stuff was used, and I am now helping to destroy it. You know, so that's a big thought if you just think about it.
Overseeing all this, do you at times feel kind of like a nervous parent?
Yeah, most days probably, yeah. You worry about the team, the health and the morale, and just where they're at mentally, like a parent. At the same time, you can be a proud parent, watching what they can accomplish. So there's both sides to that, right? There's ups and downs. So that's what makes it fun.
Unique idea of fun. When will they be done with the destruction?
Well, right now the goal is the end of 2023, although there have been some delays and cost overruns. But just to give you a sense, eliminating this last bit of the stockpile from both Colorado and what you saw in Kentucky is going to cost over $13 billion.
Whoa. Well, glad you made it out safely. Great story, thanks. Coming up on Full Measure, more media mistakes. This time, a major network's footage of violence in the Mideast turns out to be something else entirely. We look at the hard-to-believe media environment next. In recent days, after President Trump withdrew U.S. troops from Syria, some of the criticism was accompanied by dramatic video on the news.
This video right here appearing to show Turkey's military bombing Kurd civilians in a Syrian border town.
ABC News aired the video that they claimed showed attacks by Turkish troops on Kurdish civilians, telling of slaughter and horrific reports of atrocities. But ABC removed the video and apologized on Monday after online viewers seemed to find the video wasn't shot recently and wasn't even from the Mideast, but from a gun show demonstration in Kentucky in 2017. The network did not explain how such a mistake could have happened. President Trump tweeted a big scandal at ABC News. They got caught using really gruesome fake footage of the Turks bombing in Syria. The war between the media and Donald Trump sometimes looks like one of mutually assured destruction, and sometimes truth is a casualty. We talk about that with Fox News media critic Howard Kurtz, author of Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. Is there such a thing as an objective press?
There may not be such thing as a purely objective press because everybody brings their own biases, but I think there is such a thing as a press corps that strives to be fair. But I think we're seeing fewer and fewer organizations committed to the notion of trying to be fair. There is this sort of tone, sometimes it's snarky. And look, there's a lot to investigate in this administration. There was a 2-year investigation of the Russia matter. But even when Bob Mueller came out and recommended no criminal charges, it seemed like there was a brief pause, and then the press was back at it night after night, day after day, in what Trump supporters would see as pretty hostile coverage.
You were sort of on the leading edge in a way. You wrote before the special counsel Robert Mueller report came out that the press had overreached too often when reporting on that.
I don't think there is any question, even though I never said that this is a witch hunt or the Mueller investigation was somehow illegitimate or a coup. I've never bought into any of that language. And of course, there were a number of indictments. But it seemed to me that every little development, somebody hiring a lawyer, some new peripheral player being interviewed, some subpoena battle on Capitol Hill, got the sort of breaking news banners, crisis treatment constantly. To the point where I think it kind of exhausted the country.
How soon might we know at least some of the details of Mueller's report?
Not a single American citizen has been charged with anything related to Russian collusion. Not one.
Especially now, the president is not going to face any criminal charges. I think a lot of people are just tired of it, but the media are not tired of it, and I think it's still working for them as a narrative and working for them as a business model.
You wrote that White House strategist Steve Bannon warned Donald Trump very early on that his enemies would try to impeach him, and presumably the press would pick up this narrative.
Well, Bannon and Trump obviously had a falling out, but Bannon provided pretty good political advice. For example, he said that the firing of James Comey at that time was not a good idea and would cause a political backlash. But, you know, impeachment, I think, has kind of morphed from a media fantasy to maybe a remote possibility. And then after the Mueller report came out and the battles on Capitol Hill heated up with the White House, you almost sense that there's a hunger in the press because it would be such a great story to cover, particularly if you don't like this president, as many journalists and pundits privately do not.
In your view, did Donald Trump cause the media to descend into madness or just expose media madness that was already in existence?
The media's credibility problems were maybe more like a fever. And once Trump trauma took effect, that's what I call it, I think that he sort of made the media go crazy. And that's not to let the press off the hook, but there's something so visceral in the response of many journalists and pundits to the Trump presidency, to Donald Trump himself. I mean, in addition to the fact that you might expect him to be ideologically opposed to a lot of what he wants to do, he just drives them up the wall. They sort of never fully accept, many of them, that he is the president. And so I think that's where I got the madness in the title. For the press, Donald Trump has become like the great white whale. And it is hard to avoid the conclusion that so many journalists are invested in an outcome that either seems him driven from office or defeated in 2020. And so neither side has any incentive to end the war.
So in some way, both sides benefit.
In some ways, both sides benefit, but I'm not so sure the country benefits because with the press briefings largely fading away and with the constant hostility, it's become harder for all of us to agree on a common set of facts. That's one of the casualties, I think, of this all-out war between Trump and the media.
In recent days, dozens of news organizations misquoted President Trump as saying the Kurds are, quote, not our problem. Some of the news outlets corrected their reports, saying they'd made a mistake. Trump actually said, quote, it's not our border. A look at what's ahead next week, right after this. Next week on Full Measure, we take you to Copenhagen, Denmark, where growing tension with an expanding Muslim population has given rise to a radical political figure. He's testing the limits of free speech on all sides. What's your goal?
Well, the goal is for all the Muslims to leave Denmark. I mean, are we really supposed to destroy our own country because other people in other countries have problems?
That debate in Denmark next week on Full Measure. That's all for this week. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.